They were born just minutes apart, but by the time they turned 10, the world had already decided who mattered more. Jackson was the golden son, bigger, louder, always the one their father said would carry the family name with pride. Jordan, quieter and softer around the edges. Learned early how to disappear into the spaces Jackson left behind. While Jackson was cheered on the football field, Jordan spent weekends in the library. While Jackson dated girls, got invited to hunting trips, and later married young, Jordan kept a secret so heavy it turned his spine inward. He was gay. And in their family, that was the same as failure. By the time they were 30, Jackson had a house, a divorce, and a son named Kell. Jordan had a small apartment filled with books and no one to share dinner with. Until one night his phone rang at 2:14 a.m. Jackson had been arrested again, this time for violating a restraining order after a drunken outburst at his ex-wife's. The court deemed him unstable and custody of Kell was temporarily removed. None of the other relatives stepped up. No one but Jordan. It was supposed to be 6 months, just enough time for Jackson to attend anger management classes and prove himself in court. Jordan took unpaid leave from work. He bought a second-hand crib. He learned how to make dinosaur-shaped pancakes and sat through hours of toddler tantrums. Kell was 4, then barely spoke and flinched every time someone raised their voice. But Jordan never raised his voice. He knelt, he listened, he picked up flashcards and whispered bedtime stories and held Kell when he had nightmares. The boy who once shrank from every touch now ran into his arms shouting, "Dad, Jay," every time he got picked up from pre. At night, Kell would press his tiny palm to Jordan's chest and say, "I like it here. It's quiet." 6 months turned into a year, sickness too. No more supervised visits from Jackson. No check-ins, no birthday cards. The silence became normal. And Jordan, though never officially named a parent, shaped a life around that child like clay around a center. He saved every drawing. He celebrated every milestone. When Kell started calling him Dad, he didn't correct him. There were still days when Jordan sat alone in the kitchen after Kell had gone to sleep, wondering if it would last. He wasn't naive. He knew the law didn't favor people like him. Single, gay, unrelated by blood, but love doesn't ask for legality. It shows up day after day. And Jordan showed up. He had never dreamed of fatherhood. But now he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't the person who packed Kell's lunch, who kissed his scraped knees, who taught him how to write his name in big, shaky letters. In the eyes of the world, he was just the uncle, a stand-in, a placeholder. But to Kell, he was the one who stayed, who listened, who never yelled, "Dad." Jay wasn't a name he earned through biology. It was a title built from every morning they brushed their teeth together, every school night story, every soft, "I love you too," whispered back without hesitation. But families don't always honor the love that grows in silence. Sometimes they only recognize the kind that shares a surname. Jordan didn't know it then, but the life he was building, slow, steady, imperfect, but full, was already cracking under the weight of a man who once gave Kell life and now wanted him back. Follow Heart Stories for more powerful stories about love, identity, and the quiet strength it takes to be family in a world that doesn't always understand. It began with a letter, not a call, not a visit. Just a short, formal envelope from the county office notifying Jordan that Jackson was seeking to reestablish contact with his son. No apology, no acknowledgement of the years lost, just a claim, a legal blood-bound assertion that he was ready to be a father again. Jordan sat on the edge of the sofa, the letter trembling in his hand. Kell was in the next room, humming off-key as he colored in a picture of a sandcastle. Jordan's chest tightened. It had been nearly 4 years. Jackson hadn't sent a single birthday card. But now, fresh off probation and public silence, he wanted to see the boy he'd left behind. At first, Jordan agreed to a meeting. He believed in second chances, not because he trusted Jackson, but because Kell deserved the truth, whatever it may be. So he took his boy to a local park, arriving early and packing snacks just in case it got too much. Jackson showed up 10 minutes late with a backward cap and cologne that stung the air. He crouched down awkwardly and offered Kell a high five. The boy hesitated. The first few visits were strained but civil. Jordan stayed nearby watching closely. Jackson made loud jokes. Kell didn't understand and brought flashy toys instead of listening. He talked about his new job, his new girlfriend, how things were turning around. Jordan stayed quiet, correcting softly when Jackson got Kell's school name wrong or forgot his favorite animal. It was harmless at first, until it wasn't. The comments started as side eyes. "Don't you think it's weird he plays with dolls?" Then came the remarks, Jackson muttering under his breath that Jordan was making the kids soft. At one visit in front of Kellen, he spat out, "You're not even a real dad. You're just a stand-in until I got my act together." Kellen clutched Jordan's hand tighter. Jordan said nothing, but silence didn't shield them. One afternoon, without warning, Jackson arrived early at the school and tried to take Kellen home. The teacher, unfamiliar with the custody history, hesitated. Kellen panicked. He refused to leave. He screamed for Jordan. The school called immediately. By the time Jordan arrived, Kellen was shaking in the principal's office. Jackson stood there, arms crossed, livid. "I'm his father," he snapped. "He doesn't belong with that freak. He needs a man to raise him, not a damn decoration." The room froze. The principal looked down. Jordan kept his voice steady. "Kellen is safe with me. He's not a prize to be won, Jackson. He's a person," but Jackson had heard enough. He turned toward the door and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's not your son. You're just the gay uncle who got lucky when I fell." After that, things escalated fast. Jackson filed for full custody, backed by a mother who had always looked at Jordan as an embarrassment. "You don't have a legal claim," she had once whispered coldly, "and you never will. You should be grateful we let you help at all." Jordan tried to reason. He offered mediation. He asked for a gradual transition plan if it came to that, but Jackson didn't want balance. He wanted control. He wanted to erase the 4 years he hadn't been there and step back in as if nothing had changed, as if Jordan's love and sacrifices meant nothing. The court favored biology. There were no screaming matches in court, no teary testimonies, just paperwork and signatures. Jordan stood quietly as the judge, bound by law, declared Jackson's parental rights restored. Kellen would return to his father within the week. That night, Jordan tucked his son in one last time. They didn't talk much. Kellen asked if he could take his books. Jordan nodded. Then Kellen placed a drawing on the nightstand, 2 stick figures holding hands at the beach, me and Dad Jay. It read in uneven crayon, "Home." The room was empty the next morning. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed long after the door had closed. The silence that used to be peaceful now throbbed. He didn't cry, he just sat tracing the outline of that beach in the drawing, memorizing every blue wave and shaky sun, as if that memory could hold him afloat. The house was quieter than ever. Not the peaceful kind of quiet Jordan once cherished, the kind filled with lullabies, bedtime whispers, and the patter of small feet down the hall. This was a hollow silence, loud with absence. Every corner of the house held the ghost of a routine, the toothbrush still in its cup, the cereal bowl that hadn't moved from the shelf, the little shoes that Jordan couldn't bear to put away. What devastated him wasn't just the loss of Kellen, it was how easily the world allowed it to happen. A single letter, a single ruling, a single decision made by someone who had never seen how Kellen would crawl into his lap after a nightmare, or how Jordan had stood outside in the rain for an hour, because Kellen refused to go into speech therapy without his hand in his. The system didn't ask for photos or journals or scraped knees wiped clean. It asked for paperwork, and Jordan didn't have the right signatures. No marriage, no formal adoption, no legal claim. Just 4 years of love that vanished the moment Jackson demanded his son back. Worse still was the shift in the family. For years, Jordan had stayed silent at holiday dinners. While Jackson bragged about his job and got drunk off respect, he'd nodded along, washed dishes, taken the family photos. But now the mask came off. His mother, who once said, "We love you, just don't make a show of it," now told him outright that Kellen needed a normal home. She didn't come to help him pack up the child's things. She didn't ask if he was okay. What she did do, however, was bake cookies to bring to Jackson's welcome back dinner. His sister, always on the fence, simply said, "You knew this could happen," as if love was a lease and Jordan had overstayed. But the worst silence came from Jackson himself. After the court ruling, he didn't call, didn't offer thanks, didn't even let Kellen say goodbye. It was as if Jordan had been a placeholder in a long-forgotten story, and now the author had come back to rewrite it, erasing every page Jordan had once held together with bare hands. The first morning without Kellen, Jordan sat at the edge of the empty bed holding the child's last drawing. Me and Dad Jay at the beach, 2 stick figures, one sun and an ocean he couldn't cross. For a week, he didn't speak to anyone. He didn't go to work. He just walked the perimeter of the house, touching the places that had meant something, the corner where Kellen first read aloud, the window where he waved from the school bus, the rug where they built castles out of blocks. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Then one night something cracked, not with noise, but with surrender. Jordan sat down at his old desk and opened a blank document. He stared at the screen for an hour. And then he began to write. Not a journal, not a letter, a story. He wrote about a boy named Kellen and two fathers, one who shared his blood and one who shared his heart. He wrote about sandcastles that didn't last and waves that came too early, but also about lighthouses built from laughter and bedtime stories. He didn't name Jackson. He didn't name himself, but he didn't have to. The story poured out in fragments and floods. He wrote through the night, through dawn, through coffee gone cold. Days passed, the book grew. He called it Kellen's Beach, not because it belonged to him, but because it belonged to the boy who had once called him home. Jordan didn't expect much. He self-published the story quietly with no fanfare, no press, just a few copies to local libraries, a few to LGBTQ plus parenting groups. He didn't even tell his friends. He simply wanted to let it exist in the world, something no court could erase. But somehow the story found its way. It started with a review on a parenting forum, a beautiful tribute to chosen family. Then a teacher in Seattle asked for classroom copies. A week later, an LGBTQ plus advocacy group shared it in their newsletter. People began writing in single dads, foster parents, queer caregivers, all saying the same thing. This is our story too. Kellen's Beach became more than a book. It became a mirror for those who had loved without permission and lost without justice. Jordan never replied to the emails. He never chased the momentum. He still walked alone, still passed Kellen's school sometimes just to feel the ache. But at night, he'd sit by the window and reread the final page, the part where the boy returns just once to the beach, where the waves had washed everything away, and finds a single message in a bottle that says, "Love stays even when we go." For a long time, Jordan said nothing. No social media post, no blog, no viral expose. He refused to turn his grief into spectacle, even when friends urged him to tell his side. There was no side to love, real one. Love wasn't about winning, it was about staying. And sometimes it was about letting go when every part of you wanted to hold on. When Kellen's Beach began gaining quiet momentum, Jordan kept his distance from the attention. He hadn't written it for the world. He'd written it because there were words inside him that had nowhere else to go. The book wasn't revenge. It wasn't a message to Jackson. It was a memory sealed in ink because it no longer had a place in his home. He still walked past the old elementary school, sometimes especially in the fall when the leaves turned gold and the air was crisp. He imagined Kellen at recess, taller now, maybe more serious, maybe confused, maybe being told a version of the past that didn't match what he remembered. Sometimes Jordan sat at the park bench across the street, not to stalk, not to hope, but to grieve in silence. There was something sacred in mourning a child who hadn't died, but was still lost to you in every practical way. One afternoon, Jordan spotted a familiar shape, Jackson standing at the gate picking Kellen up. The boy held his backpack loosely in one hand, looking downward. Jordan didn't move, didn't wave, just watched as they got in the truck and drove off. He hadn't seen Kellen in over a year. Still, he refused to speak ill of Jackson in public. Not because Jackson deserved protection, but because Kellen deserved clarity. Not the kind born from accusations, but the kind that grew from patience. Children eventually ask, and when they do, the answers have to be clean. Instead, Jordan poured himself into community work. He volunteered at the library, started reading to children every Saturday. Sometimes he read his own story. Sometimes he didn't. Parents came up afterward and thanked him. Some of them were single moms, queer dads, foster guardians. They shared their quiet heartbreaks. Custody lost to biology, love overlooked by courts, tears shed behind closed doors. Jordan listened, nodded. He didn't try to fix it, he just understood. He never said "me too," but the look in his eyes made it unnecessary. The second edition of Kellen's Beach came out with watercolor illustrations by a young queer artist who had emailed Jordan saying, "Your story made me call the man who raised me. I hadn't spoken to him in 5 years." That message meant more than the 5-star reviews. A well-known LGBTQ plus parenting blog ran a feature, "The Book That Doesn't Shout, But Stays With You." Sales quietly climbed. Bookstores in small towns began stocking it. A therapist in New Hampshire used it in group counseling. A school district in Oregon added it to their inclusive reading list. And still, Jordan didn't change his life. He didn't move, he didn't speak on panels, he didn't try to become an author. He stayed in the same apartment with the same small kitchen, the same worn rug, the same untouched corner where Kellen used to build pillow forts. Not because he was stuck, But because he had nothing to prove, every so often someone would recognize him at the grocery store. "You're the guy who wrote Kellen's Beach, right?" Jordan would nod, offer a polite smile, and return to comparing apples. The world wanted him to be a figure, but he just wanted to be someone who once loved deeply and did not regret it. There were still hard nights. Nights when he dreamed of tiny hands in his own, or the sound of Kellen's laugh echoing through the hallway. He'd wake up with that ache lodged in his chest like a name you're not allowed to say anymore. But instead of reaching for pain, Jordan reached for his journal. Not to write another book, just to remember without unraveling. He wrote lines like, "He didn't come from me, but he came to me. I didn't lose a child. I held one long enough for him to know what safety felt like. Silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means I'm still here, even if I'm not allowed to say it." One night after a reading at a local LGBTQ+ center, a young father came up to him. He held the book to his chest and whispered, "Thank you. My son asked me who his real dad is. I said, the one who stays." And he smiled. "He knew I meant me," Jordan nodded. That was the closest he came to crying in months. Because maybe that's what Kellen's Beach really was. Not a goodbye, not a fight, but a soft, steady answer whispered into the world for the day. Kellen would ask what really happened, and someone somewhere would hand him the book and say, "Start here." The library was small, tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. It didn't look like the kind of place where anything life-changing happened. But to Jordan, it had always been a sanctuary, a place where silence wasn't loneliness, but peace, where words didn't disappear, like people did. That Saturday, the sun cast warm squares of light across the carpet as families trickled in for the children's book signing. Jordan sat behind a modest table draped in soft blue linen, a quiet stack of Kellen's Beach beside him. He didn't expect many visitors. Most people who read the book never connected the story to a real man in a quiet city library. But then near the end of the session, a boy approached. He wasn't a child anymore, taller now, 13, maybe thin shoulders, a nervous grip on the straps of his backpack. His eyes, hazel familiar, locked onto Jordan's face and didn't blink. Jordan felt his breath catch, but he didn't move. He'd seen photographs in news feeds, glimpses online. He knew this face, but not like this. Not with time stretched across it, not with a voice waiting to speak. The boy placed a paper on the table, a drawing worn at the edges. Two stick figures standing on a yellow shore. Me and Dad, Jay at the beach. Jordan's hands trembled as he picked it up, his throat clenched. The boy stood still, like he'd been rehearsing this moment for years and now wasn't sure it was real. "I found the book," the boy said quietly. "In my school library." Jordan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "My dad, Jackson, he said you left, that you didn't want me, that you just gave up." The boy's voice didn't break. It was calm, too calm for a 13-year-old. "But then I read the story. I didn't know it was about us, not at first, but I remembered that day." The beach, the drawing, the pancakes, the bedtime songs. The quiet, a pause. No one writes something that beautiful, unless they lived it. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't stop this time. Not dramatic tears, not loud trees, just quiet. Release the kind that shakes loose something you didn't realize you were still holding. "I wanted to see if you'd remember me," Kellen added. "And you do." "Right," Jordan nodded. "I never forgot you." Kellen took a step forward, awkward like a wine halfway to becoming a man, then leaned in. Jordan rose slowly and they embraced, no words, just arms around each other, two heartbeats falling back into a rhythm they had once shared daily. The library fell silent, and yet nothing had ever sounded so full. Later, they sat on the steps outside watching leaves scatter across the sidewalk. "I don't know what's going to happen," Kellen said, eyes on the horizon. "I still live with Dad, but I wanted to find you. I needed to know I wasn't wrong about what we had." "You weren't," Jordan said softly. "What we had was real." "Still is." They sat a while longer, then parted with no promises, no grand declarations, just something stronger. Truth finally returned to where it belonged. Weeks later, Jordan received a letter in the mail. Not from Jackson, from Kellen. Inside was a drawing. This time, 3 figures on the beach. 1 child. 2 adults, no labels. Just a shared sun overhead, and a caption at the bottom written in block letters, "Real family can have more than one heart." And beneath it, in a smaller, messier scrawl, "P.S. I'm keeping the name Dad, J." Love isn't always legally recognized. Sometimes it doesn't even get a chance to explain itself, but the truth, it endures. In drawings, in memories, in songs, stories written late at night by someone who never stopped loving even when the world told him to stop. Because a child can be told many things, but the heart remembers. It always does. Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved like family, even when you knew you were the one who truly stayed? Tell us below, and don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that speak for those who were never allowed to.